Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, is MCPS prepared to respond to an Uvalde-type incident? Will surging gas prices be a political weapon in November? And a 1951 Silver Spring starter home just listed for $829,000. How is that affordable? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former County Council member Mike Knapp and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. The tragedy that occurred last week in Uvalde, Texas, is heartbreaking on so many different levels. How to make sense of someone so troubled that he would shoot his own grandmother and then attack and murder defenseless children. How to process the incompetence of a police force unwilling to confront the shooter and possibly save lives. And how does someone that is a dropout from school, ostensibly unemployed, from a broken home, find the means to purchase nearly $4,000 worth of weapons and ammunition? Mark, as we learn more about this case, we find out that there were disturbing signs about the danger of the shooter, Salvador Ramos. He was increasingly becoming a loner. He was involved in self-mutilation, and there is evidence of his being bullied when younger. Now, this is a pattern of individuals involved in other similar incidents. So why is it so hard that they can't be ferreted out before the tragedy?
Well, I'm reluctant to, with each of these incidents, to try and extrapolate from the facts of one individual sort of broader trend. So let me put a caveat on that. But I do think it reflects, how shall I say, an epidemic of despair. This is beyond just the shooting incident, but it includes the opioid deaths that so many young people seem to be struggling with. And we need more tools in order to be able to more effectively address them.
Yeah, Mike, the magnitude of Uvalde tragedy is incomprehensible. And as Mark indicated, there are other things that are affecting our youth today. Here in Montgomery County, we're not immune from the challenge. And recently there was a shooting of a 17-year-old at Magruder High School. There was a threat by a student at Winston Churchill High School to shoot up the school. Yesterday, it was reported that over in Virginia, another teen was involved in a shooting. So how prepared are we here in Montgomery County, and MCPS in particular, going to address these very violent threats?
Well, I mean, I think you said it. We say this is incomprehensible, and yet we've had how many of these in the last 20 years? So sadly, they're unfortunately very comprehensible because they happen a lot. In Montgomery County, the police chief and the county executive and others had a discussion yesterday with the community, and I think we're as prepared as anybody can be. I mean, unfortunately, we had the following on the heels of Columbine in '99, we had the sniper incident in Montgomery County. And so I think we as a community have thought about how you harden a facility and how you deny access to a school. And we have very significant limitations as to who can and who can't get in. And so I think, I think we have a police department and school community that works closely together. We've had a lot of active shooter drills. So, I mean, I think we're as prepared as anybody can be. That being said, I don't think anybody's prepared. I think it becomes pretty clear that if somebody gets a military style automatic weapon or semi-automatic weapon and they decide they want to go on someplace and shoot people, it's really easy for them to get access to that weapon, and it's really hard to stop them when they get underway.
Well, yeah, it is. But the troubling trend, and I guess I'm more concerned about the troubling trend as we see what I think is an epidemic of depression and drug abuse by our teens, the expanded use of opioids and fentanyl in particular. It seems to me that we have a root fundamental issue dealing with our young people and finding out why they are becoming so frustrated and unhappy. Now, and Mark, compounded with this, we hear there's an increased need for counseling, but is that going to be sufficient?
Well, I mean, counseling can help identify problems, but obviously the broader resources in which disaffected individuals, and that's right, one of the common denominators that we see through so many of these incidents, who are not as socially integrated into the community with their peers, can be reconnected. And counseling can help that process, but there really are broader, it's broader than what one therapist or can be able to handle. It's something which as a society we need to be able to address.
Well, I mean, that's the issue. I mean, there's been a societal breakdown, I think that we've seen that, is hard to put into context. I don't want to say there's a breakdown in overall morality, but there's certainly a breakdown in our society, of functions. Our institutions, our religious institutions are being challenged and broken down. Churches weren't allowed to congregate in person during the COVID pandemic. I mean, all of these things I think have gone into it. Plus, I think the disastrous negative effects of the internet. I mean, this young man that was allegedly being bullied on the internet, and as well as being bullied at school. And we've seen this time and time again, that internet bullying has a direct detrimental effect on people, and it causes them to be depressed.
It does, but I think that we've talked about this on this show. We clearly have to provide additional resources for mental health. It can't be something that the school is alone forced to address. I've seen a number of articles with how are our schools going to cope. The reality is that this is not just a school issue. This is a community issue. It's a societal issue. It's a parental issue. And so we've got to provide resources more globally and think very differently about how we provide mental health resources. But the other piece is you cannot have a conversation about this without talking about access to weapons. We have 400 million weapons in this country. We have 80 million more weapons than we do individual people if every person had a weapon. And so you have to think that a person of his age has seen this happen many, many, many times over the last 20 years. And so if I don't have a good frame of reference to make decisions in the first place, and I look at how I lash out, I look at the examples of school shootings and mass shootings that have taken place as a way that happens because I can readily access a weapon. And so at some point, we've got to have a conversation about how you address the mental health piece, but you cannot ignore the supply of weapons piece either.
Well, in conjunction with that, up in Baltimore, the mayor has announced that they are filing a lawsuit against these alleged ghost gun manufacturers who sell kit guns that individuals can put together. But the fact is, until we have a change in our laws, an 18-year-old is able to go and purchase these types of weapons and do so legally. Now, there's another epidemic of illegal guns that are in the marketplace that are being used by criminals to commit other types of crime, and that's not the purpose of this segment right now. We want to talk about this incident at the Uvalde school in Texas. But I mean, yes, access to guns is an issue, but the counterbalance is we do have the Second Amendment, which allows individuals to own weapons and as part of their constitutional rights.
Well, one of the conversation that we can kind of have is, as Mike mentioned, guns are fairly widespread. The number of households with guns in the United States is very, very high, and that's not likely to change and not going to change. The appropriate thing too is to consider the fact that one of the takeaways that some people from these incidents is that the self-protection element of having a gun, of being armed, it's a function if you're not in a highly dense urban area and you don't necessarily expect the police are going to come anytime as soon as in an incident. People want to have the right to defend themselves.
They do, and I understand and appreciate that. And yet in a situation in a state where that's clearly a part of the ethos, in a state where police responded with weapons in a time to try to do something, in a place where all of those things theoretically should have been put in place to be able to stop this person faster, 21 people lost their lives. And so I think it certainly calls into question whether or not that approach is an appropriate approach and actually gets the outcome that people expect that it gets. Unless you're going to have 10-year-olds armed loading guns to school.
We've got to end this segment, but here's the conundrum, Mike and Mark. In Buffalo, New York, and the state of New York has the most heavily regulated firearms law in the country. It didn't prevent a similar tragedy from someone going into a grocery store and shooting and killing and maiming people. So
So we've got to look at an underlying root cause, because clearly people can access the weapons, and we've got to figure out a way to come up with a different approach to regulating that.
All right, we have to move on. Thank you both. Great topic and great discussion on this very difficult topic. When we come back from this short break, a 1951 Silver Spring starter home is listed for a lot of money. Who the heck can afford that right now? Stay tuned. And welcome back. The Montgomery County Council and the county executive bloviate constantly about housing affordability in Montgomery County. But it's shocking to learn that a mid-century home constructed in Silver Spring in 1951 as a starter home is now listed for $829,000. Mike, who just starting out can afford that starter home, and what the heck can be done about it?
Well, right now, probably 3 families could together. They can all pool their resources. And interestingly, we're seeing a lot of that in Montgomery County, where people are actually coming together to have a couple multi-families in a single home to address the level of affordability. But the practical answer is not many people. It becomes really difficult. I mean, both my daughters have just graduated and have reasonably well salaried starting positions for 23 and 25-year-olds, and they couldn't afford that for another 10 or 12 years if they were lucky, and then continue on a nice pathway. I mean, the challenge we have is that it's not a single issue that can address with just increasing supply or addressing the demand side. You've got to be able to grow our county economically. You've got to be able to provide good paying jobs so people can continue to stay here and work here and make a decent salary. And you've got to be able to increase supply, and they've got to have a ready supply, and those two pieces in conjunction. And that's, neither of those is a simple thing, but unless we have a concerted approach of doing both of those things with very clear objectives and very clear outcomes, you're never going to get close.
So the follow-up question there then is, will the Thrive 2050 Montgomery plan accomplish those things?
Well, no, because it's a plan, and it's one part of it. I think it would open up the doors to increasing densities in certain places, which could then begin to focus on supply. But you're also going to have to ensure that you've got the jobs so that you're going to increase the supply. Because one of the things you're seeing is a disconnect there. I mean, our job growth has been less than 5% over the last 10 years, which lags the entire region. And unless you're going to see increased job growth and increased wage growth, you're not going to get people to build the types of housing that you need to make that work. But it's
but we're not building enough housing. We're not building enough units, residential units to start with. Mark, I mean, this is the question for you. Isn't it just about aspiring homeowners who can remain in the county, but renters as well are being squeezed out?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're just looking at the county, and I think if we had a time capsule, we probably could come back 10 years from now, and we'll see, I would expect a convergence in Montgomery County prices with the prices of the rest of the country. And one of the reasons for that is the ability to work remotely. I am against analogizing from single example, but my 20-something, she and her fellow Whitman graduate, boyfriend, they bought a house last November in West Virginia. They could not have done that were it not for the, being able to work remotely. And that's a phenomena that, will drive a lot of people, I think, to move to locales that are much more affordable. Adjusted for inflation, it's like about what they pay, we're paid for our starter home a number of decades ago. So I think we may see more of that phenomena going forward, and we probably shouldn't just look at Montgomery County. We should look at the entire region.
Well, you're right, but I mean, the fact is that in all forms of housing units, Montgomery County is lagging in construction. We're not doing giving incentives for builders to want to build here. And in my opinion, we're making it disincentives all the time. Yes, I understand we want to save the planet, but forcing all new homes to have be electric and not use natural gas and some other things that the county is imposing. I just think solar panels on all new housing units. I mean, come on, folks. I mean, we need to be able to house our people, not before we save the planet, is what I would think. Good thing I'm not running for election, because I'm sure that message would lose.
Well, I mean, it is a very challenging discussion to have. And unfortunately, or fortunately, in Montgomery County, we are a comfortable community for the most part. And so people like their neighborhoods, people like the community just the way it is. And so when you talk about increasing density or increasing supply, we're happy to put as many barriers in the way as we possibly can, because we like it just the way it is.
Oh, but Mike, I mean, honestly, we all know that there are parts of this county where 3 families are living in a very tight house.
I know.
I mean, we're just not producing enough. We may not see them, but we know that, but they're there. And
I agree with you completely. I mean, we're 10,000 units behind. We should be building every year, but we've got to identify someone who's going to lead us in that direction, who can say, we're going to build housing, we're going to make this work, and I'm willing to lead us there and take a strong stand with a real strategy. And we haven't had a person like that in quite some time.
Well, you're right. All right, let's go on to our last topic. And this is one that I love, because I know I've said this repeatedly, that I took a photo of the gas prices the day that President Biden was inaugurated. It was $2.16. And I wanted to do that for posterity, because the next day I went out and bought a hybrid, because I knew the gas prices were certainly going to double during his administration. So this July 1st, 1 month from today, gas prices in Maryland are going to increase about 18%, thanks to an increase in the gas tax based on the annual CPI index, which is being ravaged by inflation costs. Your taxes are going to go up to 42.7 cents per gallon. So, Mark, this is a great opening for you. Governor Hogan, this is like a softball question. Governor Hogan won his first election by vowing to cut taxes. Will the Republican candidate for governor follow that same message?
Well, that's been a message that Kelly Schultz has talked about, but let's be clear, this is not just a Republican Democratic issue. Controller Francho has called on the legislature to come back into session to reverse this automatic tax increase that's expected to go up on July 1st. And the legislative leaders declined to do that. And we can talk about the rationale for that, but I think that was a mistake.
So the follow-up question to Mike, so Peter Francho is sitting out there on the island all by himself. Nobody else seems to want to touch it.
Yeah, I don't understand why they don't want, all right, intellectually I understand why they don't want to touch it, because in theory, the notion is the gas tax is how we pay for infrastructure. And so we don't want to undermine our ability to pay for infrastructure. However, that being said, given the rate of inflation and the other factors that are coming into play, it would seem that it would make sense for everyone, Republican, Democrat, to come together and say, okay, we're in kind of unprecedented territory here. And so what is a way that we can kind of shoot the gap between these 2 points and come up with a strategy that still doesn't erode our ability to fund infrastructure, and also recognizes the additional pain that people are paying at the pump and the impact of inflation across the state. And I don't understand why we're not even going to have the conversation.
Well, I want to pivot slightly to staying on this energy theme. Governor Hogan, one of the things that he would not allow to be developed was the fracking in the western part of the state of Maryland. Is there a candidate that's out there that's willing to let Marylanders tap into its natural resources?
Well, to be fair, what the governor did is the state had developed regulations that were about as strict as they are anywhere at the state level here in Maryland. And then the legislature passed a bill that would have prohibited fracking. Quite frankly, the governor's veto would have been overturned, and the governor effectively let it go into a place. I mean, he didn't veto it.
He didn't veto it, Mark. He didn't fight for it.
He did not fight for it, yes. And that's, on the other hand, I think realistically, given where the legislature was, if they had already expressed themselves in legislation, it would not have succeeded. The veto would have been overturned. Wow. But to your point, I think fracking, we've seen the benefit that fracking has had in driving gas prices down. And that phenomena has contributed immensely to the reduction in specific terms of CO2 in the United States because of the transition that's taken place from coal to using natural gas to produce electricity. And that's been a real positive. And by fighting fracking and fighting the use of natural gas, that's really made that transition that much harder.
Well, the other thing we continue to struggle with too is that there's not, the producers, the oil producers aren't producing that much because they recognize their profits are going through the roof, and to the point where even in England, they're going to go try and tax the excess profits because they're making so much more money. So there's an interesting, odd, perverse set of incentives at play here, in addition to the crazy elements associated with the taxes.
You're lucky you got the last word, because I can see Mark cogitating on this one. He was all loaded for bear.
I saw my opening and I took it.
Yeah, stay tuned for Party Shots when we come back from the short break. Welcome back. Now with Party Shots, Mark Uncapher.
Well, I want to come back with the failure of the legislature to come back into session with the gas tax. And I wanted to make the observation that the cost would have been about $40 million. That's what the fiscal note says. That's 1 year, and that assumes that the tax increase would have gone up in a future year. That's essentially less than 2% of the total surplus that we have this year. This would have been absolutely affordable for the state of Maryland.
Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Building on that, and a little bit of a segue. So we've now entered the official summer season, and most people are thinking about when they can get away and their trips to the beach and all of those types of activities. But because of the way our redistricting has taken place, our elections are now going to happen right in the middle of all of that. And so as people are starting to think about summer and all of those things when they're not here, I want to encourage people to also, if you're not going to be around, to make sure that you're identifying ways that you can vote in absentia, or make sure that you're going to be around to vote on July 19th, because elections do matter. They're going to be very important, and our primaries are going to be significant. And so please take time, now that we're getting to summer, to vote.
And every time you fill up your tank, think about who's responsible for it. Elections do matter. Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.